Somebody wasn't watching the clock close enough. That someone is me. Okay, so this is week 2 in this series we're doing on Leviticus. And I'm hoping, we sometimes we view the book of Leviticus as kind of flyover country in the Old Testament, and it's which I understand. There's a lot of dense instructions and things that seem like it doesn't really relate to us. And but I hope you will find things in here that are encouraging and draw you closer to the Lord. And hopefully together we find out that it's all the real estate in God's book is precious real estate. It's in there for a reason. And so let's go through this. So last week, we did chapter 1. And so Exodus, the book of Exodus ends with this idea that God is present. God has rescued you. God has pulled you out of slavery. He's here to meet with you. But right off the bat, in the beginning of verse 1, we learn that they've built this tabernacle. There is a place where God is set to meet with you. And even Moses can't go in. God speaks to him from the tabernacle, not invite Moses in. And so that is the cry of Israel in the Old Testament all over the place is, how can we meet with God? How can we meet in God's house? How can we ascend God's holy mountain? How can we be in God's presence? How can we see God's face? And it's a problem for us because the one thing that Leviticus hammers home time and time again is God is holy and we are not. God is holy and we are unclean and impure. And so how does a non-holy people get into the presence of holy God? It's really the idea of, the whole tabernacle is designed to be almost kind of like a mini Garden of Eden. The tapestries and things are embroidered with stars and and fruit trees and all these things. And so the picture is supposed to be, how do people get back to Eden? How do we get back to that kind of relationship where we could walk and talk with God like Adam and Eve had? How do we get back to paradise? And so that's really what this book is all about. How is it that we can get near to God? And the answer is sacrifice. Okay? Ever since the fall, that's how people can approach God, is through sacrifice. And last week we looked at the burnt offering. And kind of the application to us is, in the same way they would lay hands on this animal and identify with it and it would die in your place, we lay hands on Christ and He is our ultimate substitute. He takes away our guilt and our sin and God's judgment. I probably should have mentioned last week, but there are 5 offerings that Leviticus talks about. And 2 of them are thank you offerings, and 3 of them are I'm sorry offerings. So you have the grain offering, which we're going to talk about tonight. You have the peace offering, or sometimes people call it the fellowship offering. And both of these are a gratitude offering, a thank you offering. And then there's the burnt offering that we started with, that the book starts with. There is the sin offering or the purification offering, and there is the guilt offering. And all 3 of those are offerings of repentance, offerings of understanding that we fall short, offerings that deal with our sin. And so that is the big question that this answers, is access to God and how do we get back there. So let's look at Leviticus 2, if you haven't turned there yet, and we're just going to look at the first 6. No, we're not. We're going to look at all of it. We're going to look at all of chapter 2. I was thinking the first 6 verses, but actually we kind of need to look at all of it. And so here's this grain offering. What is it and how does it work? Okay. Verse 1. Now when anyone presents a grain offering as an offering to the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour, and he shall pour oil on it and put frankincense on it, and he shall then bring it to Aaron's sons, the priest, and they shall take from it his handful of its fine flour and its oil with all of its frankincense, and the priest shall offer it up in smoke as a memorial portion on the altar, an offering by fire and a soothing aroma to the Lord. The remainder of the grain offering belongs to Aaron as his and his sons, a thing most holy of the offerings made to the Lord by fire. So first, there's this. It's grain. This is an uncooked offering. They're offering grain, and they mix frankincense with it because frankincense smells nice, right? And so this is a fragrant offering. The idea here is everything about this is pleasing. It's fragrant to the Lord. And then verse 4 starts talking about, well, what about like a cooked offering when you offer your grain in another way? Now, when you bring an offering of a grain offering baked in an oven, it shall be unleavened cakes of fine flour mixed with oil, unleavened bread, so-and-so. And it talks about, okay, well, you could bake grain in an oven, you could fry it in a pan, basically, and there's that kind of offering you can have. And then verse 7, he just starts to give kind of some general instructions. Now, if your offering is a grain offering made in a pan, it shall be made of fine flour with oil. When you bring in the grain offering which is made of these things to the Lord, it shall be presented to the priest, and he shall bring it to the altar. The priest then shall take up the grain offering in its memorial portion, and shall offer it up in smoke on the altar as an offering by fire of a soothing aroma to the Lord. The remainder of the grain offering belongs to Aaron and his sons, a thing most holy of the offerings to the Lord. Verse 11, that gives us some no's. No grain offering which you bring to the Lord shall be made with leaven, for you shall not offer up in smoke any leaven or any honey. Curious. As an offering of fire to the Lord, as an offering of the first fruits. We kind of get a different way to look at a grain offering here. As an offering of first fruits, you shall bring them to the Lord, but they shall not ascend for a soothing aroma on the altar. Every grain offering of yours, moreover, you shall season with salt. Also curious. So that the salt of the covenant of your God shall not be lacking from your grain offering. With all of your offerings, you shall offer salt. Also, if you bring a grain offering of early ripened things to the Lord, the first fruits offering, you shall bring fresh heads of grain roasted in fire, grits of new growth for the grain offering of your early ripened things. You shall then put oil on it and lay incense on it. It is a grain offering. The priest shall offer up in smoke its memorial portion, part of its grits and its oil, and all its incense as an offering of fire to the Lord. Man, Eric, that is so edifying. Now I know what to do with my grain. So yeah, you have it's fine flour, and they mix it with oil. Sometimes they mix frankincense with it. There is a portion of it that's burned, and then there's a portion of it that's left for the priests. It's never to be leavened. It's never to have honey in it. It's always to have salt in it. And then there's this first fruits that's given as an act of gratitude to kind of the early part of the season when harvest comes in. And it's a similar thing. It's grain and oil and frankincense, and a portion of it's burned, and a portion of it is to the priests. Okay, that's the nuts and bolts of it. Cool. What does any of that mean? What do we do with that? Okay. Well, first, there's kind of like a little practical part of it here, and some of it is, the Levites, the priestly group, unlike the other people, didn't have a land assigned to them, and they're not able to go out and work the fields and stuff. Why? Well, because they're serving in the temple. Okay? They give all their time to this ministry. So then how do they get by? And so one practical part of this offering is that it supports those that do the ministry in the temple. And so they get to keep a portion of these grains and stuff that's brought in, and that's what sustains them, which is important because Paul was going to use this as an example in the New Testament. In the book of Corinthians chapter 9, he says, those who perform sacred services eat the food of the temple. This is what he's talking about. Okay? He said, hey, listen, you guys have this as a point of reference for you. You understand that those who serve in ministry, they eat the food of the temple. And then Paul says, so also the Lord directed those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. Okay? So there is a principle for us here that when we see that there's someone that serves God's people in full-time ministry, in the same way that God set up the temple that it would sustain them, and the way God sets up the church is that the church is the one that supports those who are serving in ministry. So that's a good reminder for us. It's not the primary application of the passage, but it is important. So there's that practical aspect of it, and then there's this purpose of it, that it is a thanks offering. It is a gratitude offering. Psalm 96 says, "Ascribe to the Lord the glory of his name. Bring an offering and come into his courts." So we approach God with this offering of praise and thanks. Do we have any kind of New Testament application of that? Do we give offerings of thanks to the Lord? Yeah, right? The Bible talks about the offering of our lips, that we sing praise, that we voice gratitude to God, the way we sing, the way we pray, the way we give. All of these things are acknowledging thanks to the Lord. And so there's kind of a New Testament application for that. And then there's this first fruits principle. Okay? What is there a New Testament application of that? Help me out. I was kind of jammed this week. I didn't have time to study. Okay. So is there a New Testament application of this idea of first fruits? These things that come first get offered to the Lord first. Okay. Yes. Okay. You offer the best. Your weekly offerings. Yes, all of those things are true. It is Jesus represents this first fruits of those that are. He is the first to be risen from the dead. He is the first that's going to represent his people later on. And there's also this idea of we don't. Most of us, I don't think, follow kind of a seasonal deal like an agricultural people did in the Old Testament, where there would be a harvest time, and you'd bring on all your wealth for all of the season right now, and then, but the first of that, okay, you might have, additional reaping, later, but from the first, okay, then you give an offering of thanksgiving from that right away, and I think, what's that? Mm-hmm.
Usually, not always, but your best.
Yeah. I used to help my neighbor cut hay, and the first cutting of the year was the best hay. The second cutting was not nearly as good, and maybe sometimes you could eke out more after that. That was really the bottom of the barrel. But yeah, so, the application for us is that we shouldn't wait around to see what's left over for God. And that, I think that goes for all that we have to give. We shouldn't just, pay everything and everybody and buy what you want, and then at the end, if there's some left over, well, God will get that. Or, I work and I do these other things, and I do my hobbies, and I do this and I do that, and then if I have any energy left, well, then maybe I'll serve in ministry, then maybe I'll read my Bible. There's this idea that we give God of our first and of our best, not of our leftovers. I think that's an enduring principle. And it also recognizes that everything comes from God, right? That was the whole point here. It was a recognition that all these things that maybe we feel like, oh, we worked really hard for. Well, it's still the Lord that makes things grow. It's God that makes the sun shine. It's God that makes the rain fall. It's God that made you, that had the energy to do any of these things. God owns everything. And so then even when you're able to get something, it's this recognition that this is still everything I have is still a wonderful, grace-filled gift from God. There's a passage in Deuteronomy 26 that it deals with this kind of thanksgiving offering. Let me just read it to you. Actually, you can flip there if you want. Deuteronomy 26. And we're going to start in verse 1. And it describes this thanksgiving offering. Deuteronomy 26, verse 1. Then it shall be when you enter the land which the Lord God gives you as an inheritance, and you possess it and you live in it, that you shall take some of the first of all the produce of the ground which you bring in from your land that the Lord gives you. And you shall put it in a basket, and you'll go to the place where the Lord your God chooses to establish his name, and you shall go to the priest who is in office at the time and say to him, so there would be this harvest, and you would bring the things that you have, and then you had something you were supposed to say, and you would say, I declare this day to the Lord my God that I have entered the land which the Lord swore to our fathers to give us. Okay? So right off the bat, okay, what am I talking about? I have received from what the Lord promised. Okay? It's this recognition that God keeps his promises. God has been good to me. God has delivered on what he said. Verse 4, then the priest will take the basket from your hand, set it down before the altar, and then you have more stuff that you're supposed to say. Okay? You shall go to the priest, verse 5. You shall answer and say before the Lord your God, my father was a wandering Aramean. That's not Armenian. That's Aramean was, so that's like a reference back to Jacob, the place that he wandered from South Canaan to Haran, and then that's the area. You'd be an Aramean if you're from there. He married 2 Aramean women. Anyway, so they're kind of hearkening back to their people and Jacob. My father was a wandering Aramean, and he went down to Egypt and sojourned there, few in number, but there he became a great and a mighty and a populous nation. And the Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us and imposed hard labor on us. And we cried out to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice and saw our affliction and our toil and our oppression. And the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm and with great terror and signs and wonders. And he has brought us to this place and has given us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Now behold, I have brought the first of the produce out of the ground, which you, O Lord, have given me. And that's what you say. And then you set it down before the Lord your God, and you worship before the Lord your God. And you and the Levite and the alien who is among you, like everybody there, you and your household is to worship the Lord. But it's grounded in something. Okay? There's this confession that you make that is, you remember the redemption that God accomplished for you. There was affliction, there was oppression, but the Lord brought you out, and the Lord gave you this land, and therefore everything that you have is something that the Lord God has delivered to you, has accomplished for you. And all that is that we realize that our gratitude to God isn't just platitudes. It's not just like, oh, God's nice. It's concrete things. God delivers. God's a God that saves. God makes promises and he keeps them. God has a mighty hand and we've seen it. And then God provides and he gives us what he said. And now he provides, and so I have something to give. Gratitude is tied to remembering God's saving acts. Okay? It's not just kind of like nice things that you read on a Hallmark card. It's that our God really saves. He really accomplishes things. It's not vague things. I mean, it was this prescription of specific things to say. And so the other thing that's interesting too is that what we talked about last week was you have burnt offerings. Now you have these grain offerings. You have an offering to deal with sin, and now you have an offering that is giving thanks. And both of these are combined together. Okay? Numbers talks about this in Numbers 28. The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other lamb at twilight. Also, a tenth of an ephah of fine flour for a grain offering, mixed with a fourth of a hin of beaten oil. So your morning and evening, you're doing this burnt offering, but you're also offering thanks. I think that's really neat to think of these together, that these two offerings pair with one another. These two offerings go together. Now, it's important the one for atonement comes first. We've got to get the order right. Okay? First comes atonement, and then comes thanksgiving. Okay? First, basically, gratitude follows grace. Okay? God is gracious to us, and we have gratitude towards Him. Or you could say it another way, justification leads to sanctification. We don't want to get those flip-flopped around either. God justifies His people. He makes us right with Him, and then we live for Him. God saves for people. He provides, and then we live a life of thanksgiving. Then we offer Him praise for what He's done. Gratitude follows grace. And the other thing here that's pretty neat to think about is multiple times here it calls this a pleasing aroma to God. Does God need anything? Was God like really, like, man, what I really need is, some potpourri? What is it that God needs from people? Like nothing. Okay? He had all the grain to begin with. Okay? He had all the cattle to begin with. But although God doesn't need anything from us, it says that when we offer Him our praise and our thanks, it's a pleasing aroma to Him. He's pleased by it, which is pretty great to think about, that God saves a people. And then when we just respond like we should, which is obedience and gratitude, God is pleased with that. And so those are all things I think we can apply to us. There's a couple things here I think are curious, okay? Why no leaven and no honey, do you think? I'm not sure I got this 100% right, so I'll just tell you up front. I read some different things. Yeah, so leaven is always the symbol of sin, right? What does leaven do in bread? It spreads. Yeah, grows. It constantly grows. And honey would often be something that would be, the prescription here is because you would often put honey in like a baked cake or something. It would be what you do when you make it for yourself. I'll tell you what I found. So leaven and honey, he speaks about the offering that you burn, right? And leaven and honey are agents of fermentation. And fermentation is really, at the core of it, is like some kind of decay. And so when you put honey in something, now it's not going to last forever, right? Leavened bread doesn't last like just grain does. You've introduced an agent that makes something decay. And so now we're talking about an offering, which I think this symbolizes this idea that it needs to be free of corruption. It's free of decay. It's free from anything that's unclean. Reminds us that God only accepts, just like last week when we talked about an animal, only something that is unblemished and perfect, which should cause a little bit of self-reflection in us, right? I heard somebody this week say, you want to offer thank offerings, not crank offerings. And the idea was just not things we crank through because we're supposed to. And so we check our heart, right, and see if it's more thank than crank. But when we bring our offerings of thanks and an offering of a life of thanksgiving and a life of obedience, we want it to be motivated by the right things. It's motivated by the atonement that He gave. Just like just like they would come and bring their offering and then recite all these things that God has done. It's rooted in the idea of thanksgiving for who God is and what He's done. It's not just like, I'm supposed to do this thing. It's rooted in, like, I know God is the one that delivered me. I know God is the one that delivered me from oppression and from sin and and God fulfills his promises. So I think that's the idea there is it's free of any kind of corruption, and we should examine our hearts to see that our thanks is offered without the corruption of bad motives and legalism. Why salt, do you think? They're real clear 3 times, like make sure you put salt in your offering. By the way, when you bring grain, put salt in all your offerings. Hey, this is the salt of the covenant. Make sure there's salt in there. Okay, preserves. Can you think of any time in the New Testament where Jesus particularly mentioned salt?
Salt loses its flavor, it's no good.
Yes, and what's he saying that about?
I don't know, I just remembered that part.
What, Ted?
Believers, if they've lost their salt,
Yeah.
wherewith to salt the earth.
Okay. Yeah. So, okay. Good. Salt is a preservative. It prevents decay. It's basically the opposite of the leaven and the honey. It purifies. But I think even more important is part of the idea of salt is its permanence. So you would mix salt with an offering and you would burn it, and the grain would be burned up, but the salt would remain. And salt tends to have this picture in the Old Testament of permanence. Numbers 18:19 says, "All the offerings of the holy gifts which a son of Israel offered to the Lord, I have given to you and to your sons, to your daughters with you, as a perpetual allotment. It is an everlasting covenant of salt before the Lord, to you and your descendants with you." There's this everlasting covenant of salt. Okay? God makes this covenant with you, this purifying, preserving covenant that lasts forever. 2 Chronicles 13, "Do you not know that the Lord your God of Israel gave the rule over Israel forever to David and his sons by a covenant of salt?" Okay? There's this permanent promise that God makes. And his symbol of that, his seal of that is salt, this covenant of salt. And so salt signifies permanence. God's promises endure. His love remains forever. And when Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth," are God's people meant to be a preservative in society? Absolutely. Are they meant to be a purifying agent in a culture? Absolutely. But for the reason that God's people are permanent. Okay? If you are saved by God, you are saved forever. Okay? And so we are God's salty people. We are heirs of his forever covenant of promise. And so we'll last forever. And that's the perspective we have. That's why we can be the salt of the earth, because even when the fire of God's judgment burns everything up, God's people remain. So you have that eternal mindset that says, I have this affecting agent of like salt, but I'm God's salty people. We can have a different perspective than everybody else because we last forever. God has made permanent promises to us that will last forever. Okay? If you think people lose their salvation, that meaning's out the window for you. Luckily, no one here believes that, so we're good. So this grain offering signifies dedication and gratitude. It signifies a covenant of hope. And because of that atonement, believers respond with thanksgiving. And morning and evening, this went on. And so morning and evening, we too remember God's grace, and we respond with gratitude and hope, and we live as Christ's salt and light in this world. Anybody have any questions, any thoughts on that?
Preservative,
Mm-hmm.
it was used to flavor the food and preserve it. It was an important.
Yeah, in places like the Middle East, I mean, that was I mean, yeah. How do you keep anything? You're not putting it in your fridge. You know, the value of everything else is kept because you had salt. And so yeah, there's a lot of value there. Any other questions or thoughts? I think like as we go through each of these, we're going to see things like that where we read the Old Testament, what God's people did, and then we can find application for that for New Testament believers today.
Offering the first fruits in Deuteronomy 26.
Mhm.
It sounds like that one is just like a one-time offering, but then here in Leviticus, it's every harvest. Is that the idea?
Yeah. So when you would have those, and I think in Deuteronomy 26, it's it does kind of sound that way, like this is the one time when you enter the land, but I think it's something that's still going to go on, you know, in a way. Yeah, but there it's more fleshed out. Like, all right, you're going to give this offering, and here's what you're going to say, and here's why you're doing it, and this is, and so it's really neat to see the detail that goes into it, because it reminds us that even though these were always meant to be symbols, you know, it's not like we only look back on it symbolically now, but in the Old Testament like this. You know, I mean, it was symbol then. It was meant to teach God's people things about their relationship with God and His holiness. But we can really look back, realizing what it was a symbol for, but then also tying that to Christ and what that means for our Christian relationship with God. So we get to see it magnified, maybe. We get to see that same symbol sort of on steroids because we get to see it through the prism of Christ. Anybody else? All right, let's talk about what we would like to pray for this week. Jean reached out to me and mentioned that her